Have you ever felt like learning a new language is just like trying to crack some impossible code? Yeah, you are definitely not alone. Today, we are going to dive deep into the science of how our brains actually pull this off. We're going to explore the huge debate between all the major theories of how we learn language. It really all starts with this one question that I think we've all asked ourselves at some point. How can a little kid just absorb a language like a sponge, while we as adults can spend years struggling with grammar rules? It's a real mystery, and we're going to try to unpack it. And this right here, this really captures that split perfectly. For a child, it's this effortless subconscious thing. They just acquire it. But for an adult, it's a conscious and, let's be honest, often difficult process of learning. It really feels like two totally different experiences, and figuring out why is the whole key. What's so fascinating, and maybe a little frustrating, is that even the experts don't have a single answer. The entire field is just full of passionate, intelligent people who totally disagree with each other, and that's exactly the debate we're going to navigate today. So here's our game plan. We'll start with the puzzle itself. Then we'll check out three really powerful metaphors for how learning works: the idea of the computer brain, the habit machine, and the social tool. And then, at the end, we're going to put all those pieces together to find some clear, useful takeaways. Okay, let's get into it. All right, first up, the language learning puzzle. Why is this whole thing so incredibly hard to pin down in the first place? Well, here's the fundamental problem. Learning is invisible. You can't just, pop open someone's head and watch it happen. And that's why researchers have to rely on metaphors. Now, these aren't just cute little phrases. They are the actual models that entire schools of thought are built on. So let's jump into our first major metaphor. This one sees the brain as a really sophisticated piece of hardware, and it processes language kind of like it's computer code. This idea comes from the absolute legend linguist Noam Chomsky. He argued that we are not born as blank slates, not at all. Instead, our brains come with this pre-installed universal grammar. Think of it like an operating system that's ready to run any language we hear. All it needs is the right data, the right input to get started. And building on that, Krashen came up with his famous input hypothesis. He basically claimed that we acquire language subconsciously, not by drilling flashcards, but just by understanding messages. He called this comprehensible input, stuff that's just a tiny bit beyond what we already know. But here's the catch. As Zoltan Dornier points out, this whole just listen and absorb it model, it works like magic for babies. But for adults, it often just falls flat. It seems like purely subconscious learning isn't the whole story for us. Something else has to be going on. So if we're not just computers waiting for the right data, what else is happening? Well, our second big theory sees the mind as a machine that's built to form habits through practice. This idea comes straight out of behaviorism. It sees learning as a kind of conditioning. You get a stimulus, you give a response, you get a little reward, and you just do it over and over and over until it becomes an automatic habit. In the classroom, this led to those endless drills. Repeat after me, again. But here's the thing. Modern neuroscience shows us that not all practice is the same, not even close. There is a massive difference between that kind of mindless rote repetition and what we now call deliberate practice. That's when you are fully focused, you have a goal, and you are actively, physically building new pathways in your brain. And this is the absolute key. As Daniel Goleman explains it, your brain literally does not change if your mind is somewhere else. For that practice to actually work and build real fluency, your attention has to be locked in. So it's not just about repetition, it's about mindful, focused repetition. That's the game changer. Okay, let's move on to our third and final metaphor. This one shifts the focus away from what's just inside our heads to what happens between people. In this view, language isn't just code or a habit, it's a social tool. This theory is such a fascinating flip side to the whole input idea. A researcher named Meryl Swain argued that it's not just about taking language in, it's about pushing it out. She called it comprehensible output. The big idea here is that we learn by trying to talk, by forcing our brains to actually build sentences to make other people understand us. So, from this perspective, learning is not a solo sport. It's driven by the messy, real-time act of communication. When you're struggling to explain something, or you're asking someone to clarify what they said, or you're trying to solve a problem together in a new language, that's it. That's where the real learning happens. Okay, so we have the computer brain that needs input, we have the habit machine that needs practice, and we have the social tool that needs interaction. So how in the world do these conflicting ideas actually play out in a real classroom or for a real learner?
Well, one of the biggest fights is about grammar. The old school habit machine approach might have you follow a strict syllabus of what critics called grammar McNuggets. Learning rules one by one to get it right from the beginning. But the social tool view says no, no, no. Let's only focus on grammar when we actually need it to communicate something, and we'll get it right in the end.
And that leads to another question. What are the basic building blocks? The computer brain idea might say you need the grammar rules first. That's the underlying code. But the social tool idea supports a much more modern view. Start with vocabulary and common phrases or chunks because, that's what we actually need to start talking from day one, right? And then you've got this really fierce debate about whether you should use your first language at all. A strict input model might say, ban it, maximize your exposure to the new language. But a more practical approach understands that our brains are naturally going to use our first language as a bridge. Let's be real, we're translating in our heads anyway, so it often makes more sense to just guide that process. So, okay, we have waded through all of this controversy and all this debate. What can we actually take away from it all? What does the evidence tell us are the non-negotiable, absolute minimum conditions you need to actually succeed at learning a new language?
And here it is. This is the synthesis of everything. True success isn't about picking just one theory and ignoring the others. It's about combining the best parts of all of them. We do benefit from some explicit instruction, like the computer brain model says. We absolutely have to pay attention and do focused, deliberate practice. That's the habit machine theory. And we have to get a chance to actively use the language and talk with other people. That's the heart of the social tool idea. It also means we should focus on vocabulary and chunks, use our first language as a helper, and just have a positive mindset that allows the language to come out when it's ready. It all has to work together.
So the final question is really for you. Looking at all these principles, drawn from decades of research and intense debate, what is the one thing you're going to change about your own approach, whether you're a learner or a teacher? Because that, right there, is where the real journey begins. Thanks for joining me.